Welcome to Folkways, the Folklore of Britain and Ireland podcast. Hey, how you doing? Today we're heading to the salt marshes of North Essex, where I finish my conversation with folklore researcher Bethan Briggs-Miller. We find ourselves in a waterfront pub in a fishing village as twilight draws in. In this chat, we consider the role folklore plays in today's world, plus fairy trees, walking without purpose, and bizarre lockdown sightings. Pull up a pew, grab a shandy or two, and join us as the crickets begin to sing. What do I see in it? 3 years trying to forget it leaves me exactly still in its cradle of smug plough. When I sleep, I fall immediately back to its slippery marsh. With a low horizon of masts, it hedges me in, one eye continually opened to show my root coiled in your wound. An excerpt of Essex by Andrew Motion. The county of Essex doesn't necessarily have the best reputation. Brash consumerism is the image the media likes to portray. And whilst you can find this in certain urban areas, primarily in the south of the county, and there are all sorts of reasons for this, including the overspill of London, the building of new towns, aspiration, stuff we just don't have time to get into right now. But you'd do yourself a disservice not to get to know these salty plains that look out onto the North Sea. When I think of Essex, I think of the sea, one of the longest coastlines of any county in England. The Essex coast stretches for over 350 miles and consists of sandy beaches, picturesque villages, and snaking marshy inlets like that of the strange beauty of Tollesbury, for example. So for the second part of our conversation, I meet with Welsh folklore researcher Bethan Briggs-Miller in a pub in Wivenhoe, North Essex, a fishing village she now resides in, to chew the fat as twilight approaches. Wivenhoe is full of charm, its small centre replete with cobbled streets, a slight bohemian feel attracting artists as well as academics from the nearby university. Martin Newell, author of Black Shuck, the Ghost Dog of Eastern England, also lives here, apparently. We meet outside the Rose and Crown, a popular waterfront drinking establishment, just as the sky starts to bruise into pink and orange. I ask Bethan where her love of folklore all began.
Well, I sort of became very interested in folklore before I moved down here. It was in the last few years of me living in Wales. I'd always been interested in it, but I found this amazing book one day by chance. I was in this second-hand bookshop that was closing down. So, the whole place was being boxed up, and I saw in the corner there was this book that was covered in dust, and I picked it up and brushed it off, and it was The Folklore of Glamorgan by Alan Roderick, and it was the most amazing book. And I still quote it now. I'm still using it with Spectre of the Sea podcast because it was just a wonderful selection of tales. And I devoured it. I read it cover to cover several times. I still do. I still go back to it now and again. And then all of a sudden I met an Essex lad. When I moved down here, it was lovely. Trying to feel connected to the land that I was very unsure of. I literally got off the train and was like, what the hell is that? It's the horizon. I've never seen that before. A very different landscape and I didn't know what to expect either of people because, most of my experience of Essex was from Gavin and Stacey. And my mother-in-law was even called Pamela. So I didn't know what to expect when I was moving down here, but I very quickly realised that it was a very similar place. I moved to it's actually called a a drinking village with a fishing problem. Where I live. I love it here. And the way I started to feel connected to the land was when I started looking at the folklore. The similarities, the differences, the hopes and dreams and fears of society throughout the ages. It paints a far greater picture than your basic history does. And that's what made me fascinated in the area. And I started, this is how I met Elsa. We would swap tales in the gallery. And for me, it's the most fascinating subject out there because it's one of the true mysteries of the world. We've figured out a lot. This is a side of the world that is still magical.
Yeah, and when you were talking about history there, I think this is what I find so fascinating about folklore, the fact that it's social history. What made you start Eerie Essex? Was there a particular moment with Elsa that you thought we need to start documenting this? What was the moment that inspired you to delve into this a little bit more thoroughly?
It was actually during COVID where I think a lot of people made some life-changing decisions because we stopped and thought about things and had more time and re-prioritised things that we'd never had time to think about before. And one of the things that got me through was listening to podcasts, listening to people talking. It was that sort of what you realised you missed was the banter that you had in a workplace, that you had with friends who you couldn't no longer meet with, and you were just stuck indoors. And I listened to a podcast called Weird Norfolk. It's now called Norfolk Folklore Society, and they are fabulous. I recommend anyone to go and listen to them. And I just felt like I was tuning in to two people who very much like me found it fascinating, and they were talking about Norfolk and Suffolk, and I really felt like I was getting to know Norfolk and Suffolk. And I remember thinking to myself, I just wish they'd go further south and start looking at Essex. And I emailed them and said, I'm really loving your podcast. It's getting me through lockdown. Bless your hearts. I mean, it wasn't just lockdown for me, it was maternity leave as well. So I was up all hours of the morning and desperate to listen to something whilst I was trying to nurse a baby back to sleep. And I said to them, he said, are you ever thinking about going further south? We got talking, and they said, Bethan, why don't you do it? And it was that sort of moment of, why don't I do it? And then I got talking to Elsa, and then I really liked how they had their conversational podcast, sort of like talking to each other. And it was that sort of like, because some folklore is daft and it's good to have a laugh over it. Some of it's dark, so it's equally as good to like freak out over it. It's nice to have that banter. So I approached Elsa and I said, shall we do it? And yeah, we sort of bit the bullet and just did it. And I think if it hadn't been for lockdown, we wouldn't have had time or the inclination, because it would have been, before lockdown, it was very much, you had this automatic reaction to things. I'm far too busy, and I'll never have time to do that. And since then, I am no way saying that the pandemic and lockdown was a good thing, but for us it sort of like slowed things down enough that we could say, this actually really fascinates me, and these stories are going to die out. Yes, they're in books, but they were meant to be spoken. They were meant to be passed around over a fireplace amongst people at the darkest of winters, where you're all huddled together and you're sharing stories that bring hope but also bring fear, because we all like to be scared. And yeah, that's basically what started it, and we've been carrying on ever since. And it seems to be getting more popular and more popular. People love this side of society. I mean, especially with Essex. I mean, I did. As soon as you say Essex, you don't think of the wonderful landscape. You don't think of the history, the Romans, the Anglo-Saxons. You think of Towie, because that's all that's shoved in our face thanks to popular culture. But it's so much more. In your own research, is there anything that surprised you about the county? The amount of cryptids. You expect cryptids in America. Like their forests are flipping huge, like the size of Britain, like 16 times over. I didn't expect cryptids at all. I thought they were long gone. Can you tell me more? Yeah, I mean, you've got... did you know that Epping Forest has a Bigfoot? No. We lovingly call it Britfoot or Littlefoot or something like that. But there's all these weird creatures that have been spotted by all sorts of people. I mean, everybody knows. I mean, recently they've actually DNA tested some fur, and we do have big cats. Those, alien black cats that have been told as folk tales, they actually exist. Yeah, during 1972 when they did that Animal Act and loads of people got rid of them, they're still hanging around. So if they're hanging around, what else is hanging around?
If they're hanging around, what else is hanging around? I liked Bethan's earlier point about folklore being told orally by word of mouth. It hadn't occurred to me before, but I realised this is why folklore lends itself so well to the podcast format. Yep, it's great to sit down and read folk tales, of course, but there's nothing quite like listening to them, no longer stored away in a dusty tome, but instead given life by the human voice, by the human breath. Perhaps they do best in this way. Otherworldly or unearthly themes remain some of the strongest across folklore, and no matter what your own opinion on this may be, what we might call otherworldly sightings are still even being recorded today.
It's incredible the amount of people who have seen fairies, that have seen fae. I mean, that's a part of, especially with lockdown, there's somebody, I'll find out the name, I cannot remember right now, but there is a lady who has done a survey, and the amount of cryptid sightings during lockdown skyrocketed. I think, the more you open your mind, the more you start reading things, I think it's all about, I think this is why during lockdown there was more sightings. I think we don't pay attention enough to our surroundings. We walk with our heads down, looking at phones, trying to get from A to B. It's when things slow down, which is why you get, when people are on long-term sick leave, things like that, and they go out and try to get out of their own mind, they come across things. It's having that time and that space to allow yourself to notice the world, and we're not geared to that. Everything is so fast-paced, and our day, we haven't got an hour where there's not something planned. I wake up, I get the kids ready, I go to work, I come home from work, I pick up the kids, I get dinner, and then there's a very intense ritual. There's no real time, even at the weekends. That's the weekend. You get stuff done because everyone's at work in the week, so you use the weekend to get ready for the next week. It's living from one moment to the next, and we've lost that time, and we've lost that not innocence. I don't know the word. There must be a word. When you hear like wonderful words in other languages that like encompass something, there's the word that is time to notice the wonder. We don't have that anymore, and I think this is, as I said, why we saw so much more during lockdown, because there was no itinerary, there was no destination. It was the pure delight of going out and being in nature. And I think we noticed more. And whether you noticed something or not, you probably felt more connected to nature. You probably felt more aware of things. And I think that is the key. It is finding time to allow yourself to be aware of things. And it's very hard in a modern society to get that.
Do you have any recommendations as to how people might begin to employ that side of their minds? For example, I'm always telling people to go for a walk. Go for a walk. Not necessarily to do a hike. We've got to get to this location. What's the term called? Hill bagging or mountain bagging. We've got to get to the top and say we've done it. For example, I walk a lot, and I'll often get people actually asking, this is a bit off topic, but I'll often get people stopping and asking if I'm all right. Doing fine.
Just wandering.
Exactly.
Not all who wander are lost.
Boom. So I'm just interested, do you have some way that people can incorporate this into their everyday, not just for health reasons, but also in terms of changing their view of the landscape and their relationship to it?
One thing I really like, there's a couple of things. Firstly, when you were talking about, just wandering, it made me think of that wonderful, I think it was Victorian, or pre-Victorian word coddywomple. To wander with purpose towards an unknown destination. How often do you do that? I love a good coddywomple.
I do it all the time, but I am not typical.
I think we need to do more coddywompling. But also, do you know what? Looking at maps and just picking, what's that area? Instead of wondering and pondering, walk to it. Find it out. If there's a place that you've always thought about, I wonder what's down there. Go and bloody look. It could be amazing. It could be something incredible. There's a person on TikTok who I follow, and they do just that. They go on satellite view on Google Maps and Street View, and they look at areas where it's like, that's an odd-shaped thing in the woods. I wonder what that is. And they go and wander there, and they found some amazing things that aren't on any like websites or anything. And little things like that, just finding some adventure or something, and then looking at the old OS maps. What was there? What was the old name of the place? If you put it into the British Newspaper Archive, was there anything odd that happened there? I think become more nosy.
So, listeners, this is your challenge to walk towards the odd-shaped thing in the woods.
Yes.
Just to let you know, I've got a little treat for the friends of Folkways. So here, Bethan shares a light-hearted and completely bizarre, what we might call, type of fae encounter that she had, or perhaps gnome might be a better description. I'm trying to create some exclusive content for the friends, people who conscientiously and thoughtfully support this work. In the next week, you'll get an email with a private link to enjoy this account. Just an extra fun and curious addition to this month's show, which continues the theme of modern encounters from the last couple of episodes. We now continue our conversation talking about fairy trees, those whose boughs are connected to the Tylwyth Teg, to the She.
I mean, my dad's family were all Irish. Where I lived in South Wales, there was a lot of Irish immigrants who brought their folklore over with them. There was a lot of trees around where I lived where there was said to be a fairy tree, and you could see in farmers' fields. I'm sure you can down here too, all over Britain. There are trees in the middle of fields that don't make sense. Like, why doesn't the farmer dig that up and just go across it? Oh no.
Yeah.
The superstition is so... I mean, roads have been rebuilt around trees.
This makes me think of Eddie Lenihan, the Irish storyteller in Clare, who successfully stopped a road being built due to it having a fairy tree on it. And, you know, he was painted as a bit of an eccentric in the media at the time. Someone, I think from the New York Times, flew in to interview him. But no matter what people thought, it worked. And the developers went around the tree. I'll post a link to a film starring Eddie where he talks about this, because it's so fascinating. And I was in Ireland last month, and I did a lot of cycling throughout Clare and the Burren, and I noticed that exact thing, Bethan, of these lone hawthorn trees, which you do not find in the same way in England, I've personally noticed. But every time I thought there's someone who's left that there deliberately. It's always a hawthorn tree.
Sometimes a rowan, I've noticed, but mainly hawthorn.
That's another one at the rowan tree, certainly. They're seen as, you could say, magical in some ways, but they actually have a link to beings that we might call the She, as doorways to the other world. And there's this saying that people, in general, if you say, do you believe in the fairies or the She, they're like, no, of course not. You know, whilst they're on camera, but to say, or saw it down, nobody will. Which I think gets to the heart of it, that we might not wish to admit that these beliefs are spilling over, but actually, when push comes to shove, we don't want to be held responsible for the destruction of these habitats, which is a promising sign.
Definitely, especially as it's so linked to like ecology and conservation. I'm all for it.
And before we wrap up, Bethan, I'm doing a series called Folklore, Why Bother? I was interested to learn your thoughts? I mean, we've touched a lot probably on what you might answer, but why in the busy modern world, we've got 1,001 things to worry about, why should we be musing over folk stories and folk customs at length? What are some of your initial thoughts as to the value of doing this in the modern age?
Several things, really. I think one, for understanding a place. History is written by the winners, it's written by the people in charge, it's written by those who want it to sound a certain way. Whereas folklore is a bit more natural. It's the thoughts and feelings and the true beliefs and worries and hopes of a people. It allows a better clarity into people's way of life. I've learned far more about where I grew up, where I'm living now, by looking at the folklore rather than the history. Yes, the history's interesting. Yeah, the Romans came here on this date and did this, but the folklore was, what were the people actually scared of? What did that bring with them? But also the days of folklore where people would sit around and tell stories, bringing people together, celebrating the changing of the seasons. We're not as linked into that as we used to be. You know, like you can... Simple things like you can get strawberries any time of the year. I know that's nothing to do with folklore, but it's that sort of like, you know, moving with the seasons and being aware of what is happening in nature. And there's something about folklore and learning about the ways of nature and how it shapes the world and how it shapes us. I think there's that give and take, and especially today with, you know, the environment, folklore has more of a place. I mean, I'm involved in a project at the moment on Mersey Island, where we're looking at coastal erosion, and it's not. A lot of people have asked us, so are you trying to, you know, make people aware so it stops? It's like, it's not stopping, it's coming. But what we're trying to do is raise awareness that this land is going, and it's up to you to gather those stories as a people, as a community, and mark it in history so that future generations can learn. So we haven't invented it, but there's this concept of anticipatory archaeology, where scientists, conservationists and archaeologists sort of look to what things could evolve to the future. And we've sort of not patented, that's the wrong word, but we describe it as anticipatory folklore. We're already starting to wonder, what stories will be told, because this land is going to be lost. There is going to be a new coastline, there's going to be a new shape to the land. It's not going to look the same on maps, and you only have to look at, like, you know, the predictions of the coastal line in 2050. It's a very different landscape, and what will people say in the future? Why did it happen? What weird things occurred? Are there going to be tales of, you know, when the storm comes, you can hear the bells under the water? This is all to come. So we're in a unique place now where we know it's going to happen, and we can sort of look forward. And I think for me that just highlights how important folklore is. It's understanding the land.
And what does the future hold for Bethan Briggs-Miller in terms of your folklore projects? Just to say, in case anyone doesn't know, Bethan is extremely prolific. I don't know how she has time. She's the mum of two and has about 10 different projects at any given time. So where do you see this projecting into the future? What kind of form will your work take, do you think?
Well, I think we'll always carry on with Eerie Essex. We're never ever going to run out of stories for that, because Essex has got so much going on. And same with Spectre of the Sea, which I'm working on with Owen Staten at the moment. That's looking at Welsh coastal folklore, and we're sort of merging it into an audio drama. I'll be giving talks at several things throughout the year. I'm going to meet the ASAP conference in Bath in September. I've also got in touch with a few people, Ashley, including your good self, Weird Norfolk, now Norfolk Folklore Society, the lads who are thinking of doing a Cambridge folklore podcast, Joe Hickey Hall, Icy Cedric, the lawmen. There's such a lovely community of folklorists and historians, and we're looking at a project to make a TV series where I think we're doing it from purely we want to do it. It's not about creating something to make money. We want to celebrate this land and what it is. And so I hope the next time we meet in a few years, maybe to talk about this again, we'll be talking about the TV series we make, Ashley. Why not?
Watch this space, ladies and gents. I hope you enjoyed the final part of this conversation with Welsh folklore researcher Bethan Briggs-Miller. Quite a wide-ranging couple of chats, with Bethan's enthusiasm for these topics being rather infectious, I think. I also hope you dug the Essex versus Wales halving of the shows, allowing us to come at this loose theme of folklore in the 21st century from different angles. I also had, to be honest, I had a slight ulterior motive for having Bethan on the show. As well as doing fascinating research, Bethan is also an excellent storyteller. This is a skill that's much harder than it may at first seem. You have to have enthusiasm, an excellent memory and command of language, plus oodles of charisma. Bethan has these, and it was what I might condense down to call life force that first struck me when I met Bethan. You know, when you meet people like this as they stand out, I hope some of this life force has invigorated, inspired, or just plain tickled you. Look after yourself.
Japers, get the butter out.